To appreciate what existential psychoanalysis is for Sartre, it is helpful to consider his critique of empirical psychology. At least three issues are identified. First, Sartre critiques empirical psychology's approach to defining individuals by their desires, whether desires as contained within consciousness or as independent substances, that is, biological based non conscious realities. Instead, desires are to be seen as consciousness itself, a consciousness projecting itself towards objects it finds desirable, rather than as some kind of third thing mediating the relationship between consciousness and the objects it pursues. Second, and related to the first, he criticizes psychology's reductionistic approach, which would find in empirical desires the foundation for all human activity. Reductionistic approaches attempt to explain individuality through a combination of abstract universal desires. Such psychological explanations often stop at identifying general patterns without understanding the unique, concrete relationships between these desires and individual experiences. Individuals, Sartre thinks, cannot be reduced to a set of original, inexplicable givens or abstract desires, and as such, reductionism fails to capture the essence of a person's individuality and the meaningful, free nature of their projects. Third, psychology is critiqued for dealing with human beings in a piecemeal fashion, whether in terms of a malleable clay shaped by external forces or as a mere bundle of drives. Instead, Sartre promotes an approach that views the individual as a unified, responsible being whose personal decisions and projects cannot be fully explained by external factors or predetermined drives, advocating instead for a psychology that recognizes the irreducible, self evident nature of individual human reality beyond the reach of empirical analysis, and advocates for a view of the individual as a totality that is freely chosen and self defining. And every action and tendency expresses this totality from different angles. This suggests that each concrete desire and action has a meaning that transcends its particular situation. Sartre uses the example of rowing. When I row on the river, I am this concrete project of rowing. Yet, at the same time, this concrete project expresses a more original choice and fundamental project, and it's the link between concrete project and fundamental project, or situational choice and original choice, that requires a special method for establishing those links with particular individuals and their unique manner of being in the world. Before describing that method, let's first ask this question: what characterizes our fundamental project? According to Sartre, our fundamental project consists of a desire to be, or a drive toward being. This is not a being toward death a la Heidegger, but concerns the being of the for itself, a for itself that is defined by its lack of being, a lack of the in itself, which it seeks to become through its projects. And for Sartre, such lack is synonymous with freedom and is the basis for the for itself's possibilities and values. This desire to be is not an empirical finding, but an a priori description of the being of the for itself. And notably, Sartre describes this fundamental project also as a desire to be God. So, what does that mean? Traditionally, the principle of sufficient reason suggests that all beings have a reason for existing that is external to the being itself. In other words, every effect has a cause that precedes it. The apple falls from the tree because of gravity. The building I'm currently in exists because others built it. However, if every being must by necessity have an external cause, then one could ask, if God exists, who or what caused God? One answer given is that God is the one being that causes itself to be. And this is known in the history of philosophy as the ens causa sui, being the cause of itself. Though the ens causa sui is often rejected in traditional theological considerations of God, it did gain traction in modern philosophical expression, and most famously perhaps in Spinoza. And you know where else this comes up? In the John Wick movies, where we find the phrase on the gold coins used within the underworld society. Its use here could be understood as a reference to self determination or being the master of one's own fate. And I mention this because we perhaps take a step closer to understanding what Sartre means when he says the human being's fundamental project is a desire to be God. For Sartre, the in itself is its own foundation. Being in itself lacks nothing. It is pure plenitude. Thus, for the for itself to desire to be in itself means we desire to be our own foundation as well, in the sense that God is his own cause. Thus, to be human is to strive toward being God as our ultimate and fundamental project. Sartre then asks, how can freedom exist if humans are inherently driven to be God, which seems to suggest a predetermined nature or essence? He responds, while the ultimate aim of human desire is to be God, this desire is not fixed. Rather, it is a continuously discovered and pursued within specific concrete situations. The pursuit shapes the individual's surroundings and defines their unique mode of being. Furthermore, this abstract desire to be God does not constrain freedom. It is the truth of freedom, but freedom itself is fully identified with the act of nihilation, the act of a being making itself a lack of being. As Sartre writes, freedom is existence, and in it, existence precedes essence. The upsurge of freedom is immediate and concrete and is not to be distinguished from its choice. But the structure under consideration can be called the truth of freedom. That is, it is the human meaning of freedom. And so, given that empirical psychology has those limitations, and as according to Sartre, the human being is best understood as an integrated totality, organized by a fundamental project to be that is expressed in each concrete action. An alternative method for examining human subjectivity proposed by Sartre will instead aim at examining how human acts, no matter how seemingly insignificant, in fact reveal fundamental choices in the individual's unique manner of being in the world. This approach is called existential psychoanalysis. But seeing that it shares the name with that method developed by Freud, what makes this a form of psychoanalysis and how is it different from the one Freud proposed? First, both forms of psychoanalysis seek out the symbolic nature of even the smallest, seemingly insignificant act and psychic manifestation. As Sartre writes, there is not a taste, a mannerism, or a human act which is not revealing. Second, both see dispositions and character emerging and shaped by the history of the individual as opposed to being merely inherited givens. Third, both seek to take into account the total situation of the individual, and the psychological investigation undertaken thus aims at reconstituting the life of the subject from birth to the moment of the cure, aiming at restoring the crucial event of infancy and the psychic crystallization around this event. Fourth, both search for some fundamental attitude that gets expressed within an existing situation. For Freudian psychoanalysis or other forms that emerged out of that, this fundamental attitude concerns complexes, which complex can be defined as a group of related unconscious ideas connected to memories and wishes that exerts an organizing influence on the subject's psychic expressions. For existential psychoanalysis, that fundamental attitude instead concerns an original choice and project. Fifth, both deny that the subject is in some privileged position to analyze themselves. However, they differ in the reason why. For classical psychoanalysis, it posits an unconscious psyche beyond the subject's intuition, whereas in existential psychoanalysis, which would reject the notion of the unconscious, it asserts instead that the psychic act is fully conscious, but not necessarily known to the subject. And so we have to return to that distinction that Sartre made earlier in the book between consciousness and knowledge, that they're not the same. One can be fully conscious of one's fundamental project and yet it remain unknown to us at the same time. And this is possible because of the distinction Sartre makes between pre reflective consciousness and reflective consciousness. Pre reflective consciousness is the immediate, non thematic awareness that accompanies all our conscious acts, whereas reflective consciousness is the mode of consciousness wherein one gains knowledge of one's fundamental project by foregrounding it and thus turning it into an object. However, reflective consciousness is a skill and not a ready made capacity. And this is wherein the analyst can intervene to assist in the subject's reflective consciousness. So, we're now being led into considering more explicitly the differences between these two forms of psychoanalysis. First, classical psychoanalysis determines in advance what the irreducible factor is in the life of individuals, rather than let it be revealed in the life of that individual. So Sartre here points to the libido and the will to power as two possible irreducibles, one promoted by Freud and the other by Alfred Adler, influenced by Nietzsche. Such irreducibles are the foundation for those complexes that organize the psychic manifestations of the individual. However, Sartre denies the universality and irreducibility of these concepts, but instead, to the degree one admits them at all, they merely form part of the situation that only reveals itself through something more fundamental, the fundamental choice. As such, existential psychoanalysis focuses on the concrete manifestations of this original choice of being, and that represents the fundamental irreducible. Second, Sartre denies any kind of universal meaning of symbols. There is no universal symbol such as all psychic manifestations are manifestations of repressed libidinal impulses or everything points to the phallus, etc. Instead, in existential psychoanalysis, the meaning of symbols can only be arrived at within the context of the individual's existence and the manner in which their original choice for being concretely manifests. Consequently, the meaning of symbols can change across individuals and even within the same individual as situations change. As described, human desire is for the being it lacks, characterized as the attempt to become God. However, desire also relates to concrete objects in the world. This relation manifests in three categories: to do, to have, and to be. Now, ultimately, desires of doing are reducible to either the desire to be or to have. And this leads to a dual determination of desire. One is a desire to be a certain ideal being, the in itself for itself, which ultimately aims to be God, and the other is a desire to enter a certain relation with objects, a relation characterized by possession, appropriation, and ownership. And as we'll see, the desire to have is itself ultimately reducible to a desire to be as well. So let's take up the example of artistic creation. The doing involves the creation of the artwork. In creating something, the creator maintains a continuous but separate existence from the created object and enters into a relationship with that object in making it theirs. This establishes a synthesis of creator and creation, artist and artwork. This relationship establishes ownership of the artwork and whereby I can enjoy it. At the same time, in making art, I am in the process of becoming an artist. What's more is that in creating the artwork, there is something of myself in the artwork, such that it is not merely an object over there that I enjoy through ownership, but which in some way comes to define me. That when another comes to artwork, they're not just coming to an object separate from me, but in some sense, they are approaching me through the object. Now, knowledge functions somewhat similarly. When we discover a truth, it becomes part of us. We assimilate it, revealing a facet of the world through us now. This dual role as creator and possessor grants us a unique relationship then with the known, making it both a part of our consciousness and an independent being. A third example that Sartre addresses is play, which initially seems, according to Sartre, to be a desire to be. It's an activity where we are the origin, setting our own rules and values, and through which we discover ourselves as free. Play is thus an expression of the desire to be, a way to manifest absolute freedom. However, play also involves a desire to have as well. In Sartre's example, skiing is not just about movement and skill, it's also about possessing the snowy field by changing its matter and meaning through the act of skiing. This transformation allows the skier to experience the snow as a connective tissue between the start and end points of the descent, organizing and unifying the environment in a way that adapts to the skier's activity. By skiing, one appropriates the snow, creating a unique and personal relationship with it. And I should know, it's just very interesting having come across this as when I translated a work by Jean-Luc Marion, an article published in a journal, he uses the example of skiing as well, but when he talks about skiing, he actually inverts the whole relationship, where it's not merely a matter of possessing in order to accomplish skiing. It is the accommodation and being possessed by the terrain, accommodating myself, changing my horizons, whereby skiing becomes a possibility to me. So there's this inverse intentionality. Go instead of going from skier to terrain, as in Sartre, it is the terrain which is reconstituting me, and that's the way I become a skier. So it's just a very interesting inversion there, I noticed. So, from this description of artwork, knowledge, and play, we can come to see how the desire to be and to have can work in tandem. More fundamentally, however, desire is a desire of being characterized as the free lack of being. But when that abstract desire gets concretized in one's relationship with everyday beings in the world, that relationship is typically characterized by having, or more precisely, appropriation or possession. Sartre then asks, what is meant by to appropriate? It's not simply to use something. As the taking possession of and using something for oneself, it entails a kind of ownership, though not necessarily a socially sanctioned ownership. The thief, in this case, owns the stolen car, but not legally. Nonetheless, possession, whether legally sanctioned or not, creates an internal bond of being between the possessor and the possessed. And we see this relation perhaps most explicitly when we talk about someone or something being possessed. As such, this bond cannot be explained by a theory that views subject and object as independent substances. Instead, it originates from the for itself's insufficiency of being. The desire to possess is not simply a desire for an object, but a desire to be united with it in a relation that forms a unique reality of possessor possessed. This relation is marked by a synthesis of self and non self, where the object reflects possession back to the for itself. So to possess an object is to be the unique end of its existence. It is an internal rather than external relation. So when I encounter a religious relic of a saint, I meet the possessor in an object that the saint possessed while they were alive. As such, just as a desire to do is reducible to a desire to have, a desire to have is reducible to a desire to be. For this reason, all forms of appropriative behavior are symbolic, representing the deeper structure of being in the world. Possession is a symbolic act that represents our attempt to appropriate the world through specific objects. And this act of appropriation is not just about owning an object, but about integrating it into our being, making it part of ourselves, and it part of us, and through it, symbolically possessing the world. Existential psychoanalysis then aims to provide a method for revealing the meaning of our acts of appropriation, drawing connections between these acts and the fundamental choices that define our specific ways of expressing our desire for being in the world. Existential psychoanalysis is to be grounded in ontology, the study of being, whereby we understand human reality as a choice of being, often expressed through the appropriation of things in the world. And the things of that world that are appropriated as such based on the mode in which they reveal being to us. A thing is chosen depending on the way in which its being gets expressed. And it's not the object itself, but something about the object that marks its symbolic significance. It is the mode of being or quality of the object that matters, and existential psychoanalysis seeks to bring out the ontological meaning of such qualities. So, what is a quality? Earlier in the book, Sartre states quality is the whole of being unveiling itself within the limitations of the there is. It is the annihilating acts of the for itself that carves out the place for the there is, and whereby quality then reveals itself. And just quickly, when he says there is, Ilia, it is referring to the inert, opaque materiality of reality, the in itself. And so the revelation of the object's qualities entails a free choice, suggesting that qualities mark some kind of synthesis between what is given in the in itself and what the for itself brings to the given. And our reactions to qualities, like the taste of a tomato or the fluidity of water, reveals our perception of being's manifestations. Existential psychoanalysis aims to uncover the symbolic significance of these qualities in light of our preferences and aversions toward them, such as why someone might like oranges but dislike water. Now, to demonstrate what Sartre means here, he chooses what is, at first glance is a somewhat surprising, perhaps bizarre example. And I'm perhaps experiencing as more bizarre because the example is slime, and my children love slime. And I was thinking about how slime is so inconvenient and it really kind of, kids love it, parents hate it, sort of thing. So, what does he mean? What is the purpose of using the example of slime as a quality of material reality? Well, first, the slimy cannot simply be a projection of our moral judgments onto a material quality. Rather, the slimy quality itself must inherently possess this psychic meaning we associate with it. So, from a young age, Sartre says we encounter a world where material substances have psychic meanings. And those psychic meanings cannot be explained by our projection or making analogies. On the other hand, the fact that sliminess evokes disgust or curiosity, playfulness or annoyance, marks the synthesis of certain physical qualities to those moral qualities we bring to it. And thus, the value and symbolism of slime is not derived from brute qualities of material reality. But then, how does the symbolic and meaningful features of such a quality arise? Sartre returns us to the project of appropriation, wherein the slime is revealed as something to be possessed. Here, there is an original bond formed between the slimy and myself. It is through this bond that its materiality has a psychic meaning for me, a meaning that is also its symbolic value. And this encounter with the slimy teaches me about the world. As such, what I get back from the slimy is neither its pure opaque materiality nor some pure psychic reality. Instead, it transcends this opposition of psychical and physical and giving itself to me in its unique mode of being in itself. And what mode is this in the case of the slimy? Well, Sartre says slime represents a state of being that is neither solid nor liquid, embodying a sense of ambiguity and indeterminacy. This quality makes it a powerful metaphor for existential horror as it disrupts the clear distinctions and boundaries that are comforting to human consciousness. A slime, with its sticky and engulfing properties, symbolizes the threat of materiality overwhelming and dissolving the freedom and distinctiveness of consciousness. As Sartre writes, slime is the revenge of the in itself. And at the same time, slime reflects back on the for itself its own sliminess. Sliminess is not just a physical property of the slime, but an ontological symbol representing a type of being that is both threatening and not fully realized, an anti-value that haunts consciousness. Now, Sartre defines anti-value as an ideal being which I reject with all my strength and which haunts me as value haunts my being. An ideal being in which the foundationless in itself has priority over the for itself. This anti-value transforms the project of appropriation into a project of flight, as the for itself seeks to avoid the threatening mode of being symbolized by sliminess. So, in summary, sliminess is presented as a complex and multifaceted symbol. It challenges the boundaries between self and other, possession and being possessed, creation and destruction. It serves as a metaphor for the existential tension between maintaining individuality and the risk of losing oneself in the greater whole of being. So, in this final chapter, we have seen how human reality is a passion driven by the desire to transform the self, for itself, into a self sufficient being in itself, for itself. And this is akin to the concept of God. But this pursuit is ultimately futile, making the human being what Sartre calls a useless passion. We are condemned to seek meaning and to seek completeness, but do so in a reality that lacks any intrinsic meaning except what we give to it, and wherein the goal of completeness is impossible, leaving us in a perpetual state of dissatisfaction and striving. And so, with the exception of a short conclusion coming up, this marks the completion of Being in Nothingness. The next and final video of this book will do three things. First, it will provide an abbreviated outline of the entire book, and this can be used as sort of a summary of what you've watched, or might be a good first video for some to watch who may not be able to have time for the rest of the videos or want just a quick gist of what Being in Nothingness is about. In that same video, though, I'll also address the conclusions that Sartre makes in the final 10 pages or so of the book. And then I'll end with some of my own reflections on this book. If you found this video helpful in some way, you can support this work by liking the video, sharing it on different social media platforms, and if you haven't already, subscribing to the channel. You can also support this work financially through the Super Thanks button here on YouTube. And if you want to be an ongoing supporter, you can do so on Patreon, where I offer video transcripts, unedited materials, and prioritize questions and comments here on YouTube. And I'm also doing more of these sort of extra material videos. So every video I post, there are things I cut out, and I'm now trying to post more of that over on Patreon. So the link to that will be down below in the description. I want to thank the following for already supporting this work over on Patreon. So thank you for watching. Until next time, be well.